The image of the ancient manuscript tome containing esoteric and magical secrets is a commonplace from medieval tales all the way down to contemporary stories of the occult and horror novels. But when most of us imagine such a volume, we conjure to mind perhaps something a bit like this, a copy of Trithemius' Stenographia, a European or Middle Eastern volume filled with scrawled Latin or Arabic curious sigils and strange strings of an unknown language. But the few surviving manuscripts of the Americas are important in that they too contain esoteric wisdom, specifically for the complicated timings of celestial bodies and their dire importance upon our world. And indeed, the oldest known surviving American book contains complicated calculations and seemingly grim predictions for the various phases of Venus, in both its appearance as evening and morning star, but also the period when the planet is invisible during superior and inferior conjunctions. What can we learn about the Mayan worldview and their astrological beliefs from this oldest American book? Make sure to subscribe here to Esoterica for weekly explorations of topics in esoteric history. And if you'd like to support the work of providing evidence-backed, free, and accessible content like this episode, then I'd hope you consider checking out our Patreon or some of the cool merch that we have available on the channel. If you're new to the study of esotericism and you want to get a reliable lay of the land of the literature, make sure to check out my study guide. And if you're actually interested in historical books of the occult and the mystical, like this copy of Trithemius, check out our rare bookstore at Esoterica Rare Books. You can find all those links in the pinned comment and in the description below. But now, let's turn to the oldest known American book, the Códice Maya de México, and the esoteric and deadly portents brought by the appearance of the planet Venus in those pages. I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and welcome to Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion. If you've ever wondered what the icon for this channel represents, it's actually a Mayan hieroglyph for the sound tsak, which means something like to conjure a mystical vision. Years ago, I was actually planning to visit the region in the Yucatan and was in the process of learning to read some of the Mayan hieroglyphs because that's what kind of nerds we are around here. And I was learning to read some of them and come across the glyph tsak, literally mean hand grasping a fish, which simultaneously means to conjure a mystical vision. It's very often in the context of the bloodletting rituals of which some envision serpents as beautifully represented on the lintels at Yaxchilan. The glyph struck me as exceptionally beautiful because the image of the hand grasping the fish is a wonderful image for the evanescent nature of the mystical vision. The fish slips through the hand just as the vision and the blood smoke is dissipating just as quickly as it rises up from the brazier. This tsak glyph captures what I find to be perhaps one of the most interesting and fascinating aspects of the esoteric dimension of religion and philosophy. That as quickly as one grasps it, as much as one ever really does, it's always already slipping away. And I could just think of no more beautiful symbolic expression of this notion of the tsak glyph to represent the world of esoterica. Hence the glyph becoming the icon for the channel, born out of my amazement of such a beautiful linguistic sign, but also out of a deep respect for the extreme spiritual athleticism taken on by the Maya religious culture. And if you want to learn a little bit more about this Mayan bloodletting mysticism, make sure to check out my episode on just that topic. Whereas Mesoamerica is often associated with human sacrifice, in the case of the Maya, that sacrifice was overwhelmingly the sacrifice of themselves, auto-sacrifice. So again, make sure to check out that episode. But in this episode, I want to turn to another and perhaps even more famous element of Mayan religion and esotericism, their complex calendrical system, especially that system as it captures the cycles of the planet Venus in the oldest known American book, the Códice Maya de México, which I'll just call the CMM. But to start, only four Mayan books are known to survive. 3 named after the European cities in which they're now housed, the Madrid, Berlin, and Paris codices, along with the only codex still in its region of origin, the CMM. Let that sink in for just a minute. From a civilization represented by thousands of cities spanning centuries of development, only 4 books survive. Of course, that's due to the collapse of the mass urban areas, though the Maya as a people didn't vanish or any such nonsense, with millions still living and speaking various Maya languages in the region, and in fact, still making use of the traditional calendrical system, as we'll see. They are also the victim of the humid environment of Central America, which ravages organic material. But of course, also there's just the colonial destruction of unknown numbers of manuscripts. The most famous and infamous incident of this was by Friar Diego de Landa on July 12, 1562, along with the continued and ongoing cultural suppression of indigenous peoples in the region, have all resulted in a nightmarish paucity of Mayan cultural wisdom in written form. However, with the decipherment of the Mayan script, despite the Cold War challenges that got in the way of that process, we are at least now in a position to appreciate and understand these handful of volumes that thankfully have survived. While books from the Oaxaca and central Mexico regions used animal hides as a base for their books, others, like the CMM, were made from a base paper prepared from the inner bark of the fig tree, alternatively layered and folded and then coated in a white layer of gesso. The writing surface for the CMM is made of calcium sulfate, basically plaster of Paris, while other manuscripts that we have are employed calcium carbonate. Unlike the scroll or the Codex, and many much more like the books of Southeastern Asia, Mayan books were folded accordion style, with the CMM composed of 10 surviving pages of rectangular sections of about 12.5 centimeters, with a probable another 10 or so lost. This paper is known as amatl paper in Nahuatl, and amate in Spanish, and hun in Mayan, and it was highly praised in classical Mexico and Central America, with the Triple Alliance, or the Aztecs, demanding thousands of pages of this paper as tribute from conquered foes. Paper acted as tribute, it was that value. Further, it was and is of a special value in the religious settings where it would be splattered with rubber, oils, and especially royal blood before being burned in those rituals which would elicit mystical visions, so the Tsak vision of the vision serpent. Such books were highly skilled productions involving the application of various skilled crafts, much as in the rest of the world in the preparation of things like paper, and they were thus elite prestige items. And that's before all of that highly skilled knowledge was written upon that paper with various pigments, most famously Mayan blue. Interestingly enough, the CMM actually reveals a bit about its production. Faint draft lines in red show that the text was probably first drafted and then completed by a secondary scribe. Though that secondary scribe wasn't exactly following precisely all the lines, revealing something of the history of the construction of the volume. Further, it isn't clear if either draftspeople were also responsible for the scribal work in the volume. Thus, this volume was likely the result of multiple hands, from the production of the paper all the way to the writing, much like paper and writing in many other parts of the world. But what do we know about the origins of the book itself? Sadly, very little. It probably dates to the 11th or the 12th century, thus sometime around the decline of Chichen Itza as a regional power, thus toward the end of the post-classical period. And it was likely looted from a cave along with some other items somewhere in the region of either northern Chiapas or Tabasco in the 1960s, where it was then acquired by Josue Sáenz before being displayed at the Grolier Club in New York. It was actually previously referred to as the Grolier Codex in the early 1970s, before being repatriated to Mexico and subsequently donated to the state. To my knowledge, it's currently on display, or has been in the past. I'm not sure about its current display status, but hopefully it will be in the future, and I would love to make it to Mexico City to see it in person. However, since its discovery, debate has raged about the authenticity of the volume, often driven by rival Mayanists, J. Eric Thompson and Michael Coe. However, after extensive scientific, artistic, linguistic, and astronomical analysis of the text, it has proven to be authentic. And that astronomical analysis is at the heart of the book's content. Every culture actually develops some means by which to count, by which to calculate, and by which to keep track of the passage of time based on the movements and patterns of celestial objects. And thus, various calendrical systems have emerged, from lunar calendars to solar calendars to combined lunar-solar calendars, along with the 365-day solar calendar composed of 18 months of 20 days, with 5 leftover days being especially dangerous in the minds of Mesoamericans. They also kept a parallel 260-day ritual calendar. However, further astrological almanacs, which track the cycles of the planets, especially the planet Venus, known as Chak-ek or No-ek, the great star, given its brilliance following the sun and the moon. Indeed, it was because of the precision of their observation traditions over hundreds of years that allowed the Maya to recognize that the morning and evening stars were in fact the same celestial object. Further, and just as important, was that the Maya recognized that the movements and positions of celestial objects did seem to have some kind of direct influence upon terrestrial events, something that many other people noticed. From the position of the sun and the changing of the seasons, the movement of the moon and its relationship to the tides, and so forth. Again, we now think of something like astrology as a pseudoscience, but people had really reasonable beliefs for this idea in their time period. In their case, the 4 phases of Venus, its appearance as morning and evening star, and its occultation in superior conjunction, that's where it passes behind the sun relative to us, and then inferior conjunction, where it passes between the sun and the earth, and thus, in both cases, it's invisible, in the later case because of the sun's intense luminosity. Well, these cases were reasons for especial dread. Thus, the beautiful Venus of Hellenistic astrology has in the Mayan system a governance set by a seemingly 4 grouped deities, which were extremely frightening, which were harbingers of chaos and famine and pestilence and evil. Thus, knowing when these events in the Venusian cycle would occur, especially in relationship to the 260-day ritual calendar, was extremely important to Mesoamericans. Now, this isn't the place to go into all the intricacies of the Mayan calendrical system, from the long count to the lords of the night and everything in between. It's extremely fascinating and very complex, but it's worth noting that the 365-day and the 260-day calendars do share interlocking dates every 52 years, about the length of a human life. In the Aztec religious ecosystem, such an overlap was cause for extreme anxiety and was met with the new fire ceremony. Here, all the fires in the capital city of Tenochtitlan were extinguished, and the cultic statues were actually all destroyed lest they turn upon their once worshippers. On a hilltop, new fire was kindled atop the body of a captive at midnight on those overlapping dates. If successful, this fire was used to light all of the fires in the city, thus starting the 53-year timer all again. If the priest couldn't strike fire for whatever reason, the sun itself could be beset by rampaging star demons. I mean, the stakes were pretty high in this. The last time this ceremony is known to have been performed is in 1507, and shows just how such calendrical overlaps, transformations, and various cycle processions meant to the people of classical Mesoamerica. Indeed, the date of one's birth in the 260-day calendar was often just built into your very name. So again, these calendrical issues are tied to existential threats and identity in the Mesoamerican imaginary. But how did the 260-day calendar even work? A date in a given sequence of 1 to 13 is paired with one of 20 sequential day signs beginning 1 Emish. After running through that week of 13 days with the day signs, the count begins again at 1, but with the 14th sign in the process, 1-ish, counting something like a month. The system cycles 13 by 13 through the day signs with different day sign permutations for 260 days until it restarts at 1-ish. I'll include a link actually to the absolutely fantastic channel Ancient America's video if you want to learn more about this extremely complicated, wonderful calendrical system, and their channel is just fantastic for stuff about the indigenous people of these continents. But this 260-day calendar is important because the CMM is specifically interested in the grimly auspicious occurrence of specific phases of Venus during the 260-day calendar, especially at the start of 4 respective phases of Venus. But to appreciate the Mayan astrological genius here, we need to think a little bit about how Venus appears to us here on Earth. Given Venus's orbit around the Sun, it's a mere 225 days, and Venus's position relative to the Sun and the Earth, Venus never appears to stray far from the Sun itself. For the Maya, 236 Earth days, Venus appears as the morning star, rising prior to the Sun before passing then into superior conjunction invisibility, apparently disappearing behind the Sun for 90 days, then reappearing as the evening star, now seemingly chasing the Sun at sunset for another 250 days, before finally being hidden by the powerful luminosity of the Sun as Venus again vanishes between the Sun and the Earth, again for another 8 days during inferior conjunction. The start of any one of those 4 phases was of extreme dread to the composer of the CMM. Now, like all calendars, these numbers aren't exact. Well, at least for the 4 specific phases, the overall total of the phases is 583.92 days, which in the Mayan calculation was around 584 days, while the actual average synodic Venusian phases are actually 263 days for morning star visibility, 50 days for superior conjunction invisibility, 263 days for evening star visibility, and 8 days for inferior conjunction invisibility, respectively. Given the careful observations of the Maya, why this discrepancy between the synodic times and the Mayan times? Well, scholars aren't sure, but the best guesses probably have to do with facilitating another thing that was very important for them, which was predicting lunar eclipses. Indeed, these cycles were well understood by the Maya. The 580-day Venus count is known from other Mayan codices, especially things like the Dresden Codex. In fact, these are recorded in specific 104-year cycles. But why 104 years? Remember how the Maya calculation of the Venus phases cycle is off by just 0.08 days? That's crazy impressive. That's just enough for the calendar to become conspicuously inaccurate, losing about 5 days in exactly 104 years, or 65 counts of the total Venus phase cycle, thus requiring calendrical recalculation. In fact, scholars believe that the CCM originally detailed specific auspicious Venusian dates in the 260 calendar count for exactly one 104-year period, and may have actually been interred with a ritual expert. The remains of mites associated with human decomposition have been found on the manuscript, specifically when the book itself had become inaccurate. It was stored with the person that used it in life and death. Now, this is all kind of abstract, so let's actually take a look at some specific pages of the CMM to get a better understanding of all of this. Each page of the manuscript represents the beginning of a specific Venusian phase with a list of 13 dates in the 260-day calendar upon which that specific initial phase would fall. There's then a complex illustration of what would occur on that date, and it's often frightening imagery of the divine assault on the human world. In addition to that, there are what scholars call ring numbers, which is the day-to-day count required to arrive at the subsequent Venusian phase. For instance, the ring number on page 1 of the CMM tells the reader to count forward 90 days through the period of superior conjunction invisibility from the date 1 Ka'an, which is actually missing in a lacuna of the manuscript, but to the appearance of the evening star on 13-ish. Then another 250 days to count to the beginning of inferior conjunction invisibility on 3 Ka'an. 8 days then to the appearance of the morning star on 11 Eb. 236 days to the beginning of superior conjunction invisibility on 13 Lamat, and rinse and repeat. The surviving manuscript documents 584 Venus cycles, again with most scholars reasoning that the original manuscript, when it was complete, was originally twice as long and thus covered an entire 104-year Venus cycle, again before the whole thing needed to be subjected to calendrical recalibration. Of course, all of this amazingly sophisticated astrological math was ultimately in the service of sophisticated astrological analysis. This was meant to be useful. Thus, a CMM is something of an astrological almanac. However, unlike in Western European astrology or Hellenistic astrology more generally, where there's a 1-to-1 ratio of deity to planet, where Venus is considered to be benefic, or at least a lesser benefic sign, and associated with no less than the goddess of love, in Mesoamerican astrology, it seems that Venus and other planets could be associated with a range of deities. Or perhaps we might say that Venus could manifest as a range of such deities, all of which, at least in the case of Venus, were fearsome and harbingers of doom. Now, while some of these deities are better understood than others, such as the long snout lightning deity Ka'awil, who appears on page 1 and 4 of the text, others are much more mysterious and really we don't know much about them. Scholars don't know much about them. However, the skeletal deity is likely the Mayan god of death, Kimi or Kisin, which is typically matched to the central Mexican Venusian war and death deity Tlahuizcalpantecutli, and unsurprisingly, this deity is depicted gruesomely decapitating a captive with a jagged blade. In other instances, these various Venusian deities are seen shooting darts into temples or water sources, lording over and killing bound captives, perhaps even lording over the maize deity, and various other frightful portents for humankind. Interestingly, the art of the manuscript is often strongly under the influence of both Toltec influence in line with the presumed geographic area in which the Codex was constructed and found, but also post-classical in its time frame, and also seems to share some common relations to deity depictions found at the wonderful and amazing site Chichen Itza. Regardless, these calculations represented specifically dangerous days in the 260-day calendar, and tracking them would have been a dire necessity. What we have is a glimpse into the warning of how to learn to read the stars, specifically vis-a-vis Venus. The Códice Maya de México is an important cultural treasure. It's the oldest book hence discovered in the Americas, and it contains important astrological and calendrical lore for a rare survival from the ravages of both time, geography, and inquisition. It's also an important window into the titanic astronomical and mathematical achievements of the Mayan civilization. The precision and specificity of the astronomical calculations in the CMM were born out of centuries, millennia, of careful observation of the sky and the use of mathematics, including the number 0, with cities designed specifically with astronomical observations in mind. You can still go and see the Caracol, which were probably astronomical observatories. Further, it's an important connection to the enduring practice of the Maya daykeepers, who continue to use a 260-day ritual calendar down to this day for a range of rituals. In this way, the manuscript is a profound link to the remote past, to the twilight of the classical period, and the contemporary survival of indigenous wisdom and ritual down to this day. Andrew Turner has the best edited volume on the Codex with multiple essays on various aspects of the text, the astronomy, the astrology, the codicology, analysis, epigraphy, and a page-by-page analysis of the Codex. And it's shockingly affordable. Can you believe that? I just said that a book is affordable. It's beautiful, and it contains even a full-scale facsimile in fold-out of the text in beautiful full color. It's truly a volume worth having. And I'm also going to put some specific recommendations for learning more about the historical Maya, and especially some fantastic books for learning to read their hieroglyphs, which isn't as difficult as you might imagine. The Maya, their calendars, their language, their civilization are often just much more mystified into a caricature by apocalyptic New Agers, rather than actually appreciated both as an important historical civilization, but as millions of people that have endured oppression and erasure for centuries and are still there in Mexico and Guatemala and Belize. The loss of so much cultural wisdom is profoundly depressing. Only a handful, 4 surviving Maya books. But that's a solid reason for cherishing those books that we have with all the more care and with all the more depth of our study. Until next time, I'm Dr. Justin Sledge, and thank you for watching Esoterica, where we explore the arcane in history, philosophy, and religion.